Hello, and welcome to the Sound Architect podcast. I am your host, Sam Hughes, and today we have a lovely episode focusing on the music for Sackboy, A Big Adventure. I am joined by audio director and composer Jay Waters of SUMO Digital, as well as principal composer and audio lead Joe Thwaites, and music supervisor James Marshall from Sony Creative Services Group. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining me today. Thanks for taking the time to chat about Sackboy.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no worries. Absolute pleasure. Pleasure to have you. Now, before we get started, would you each like to introduce yourselves and just give our listeners a brief idea of what your role was on the game?
You go first, Jay.
I'm Jay Waters. I'm the audio director at SUMO Digital. I've been there about 9 years now. I kind of started on Little Big Planet 3 and then just continued through to the development on Sackboy, A Big Adventure.
And I'm Joe Thwaites. So I'm composer and music producer for a team called the Creative Services Group. And we kind of a central servicing group who work with lots of different teams. So in this case, we're working with Jay's team at SUMO. And I was looking after a lot of the music stuff, doing a lot some bits of composition, as well as kind of doing the interactive systems and putting it all into game and creating the interactive fun Sackboy.
Nice.
And I'm James Marshall, also part of the Sony Creative Services Group, and I was music supervisor on the project, so handling the licensing, negotiation, and also the selection of some of the tracks, which I worked alongside Jay and Joe as part of the project.
Awesome. And as you said earlier, James, we have Jay, Joe, and James. So it's not going to get confusing at all throughout the entire interview. I will definitely try and keep on top of that. Now, I have to say, I've been playing a lot of Sackboy over the last week or so, and it's just so much fun. It's super fun. It's super satisfying all around. And the music really does play a big part in that. Now, how did it all begin? Like when you were first beginning on the project, how did you decide what direction you were going to take with the music? And how did you decide when you were going to start using licensed tracks?
I think licensed tracks have always been a big part of the Little Big Planet games, so that there was never really a question. I think if anything, the question was what kind of a balance were we going to strike between licensed and composed? Yeah, I can't remember what we ended up with, but I think it was probably about 30-70, wasn't it, James?
Yeah, we're about that in terms of across the project, which is probably more than it's easily more than you'd find with other platformers. Most games would focus more on a bespoke score, but given the heritage of the franchise, it was something that we did want to focus on.
Yeah, sure. And I have to admit, I didn't really notice at first, because you must have done something with the licensed tracks as well throughout the levels, right?
That was a big part of the fun, right? It was taking the licensed tracks, and one of the things we wanted to do right from the beginning was what can we do to kind of really integrate these into the world? How can we take licensed music a step further and make it really cool and sit in these worlds and adapt and change to how you're moving around? Because, previously, licensed music would have kind of just played out and just been, from beginning to end. But we wanted to make it a lot more bespoke and make it kind of feed into the narrative a lot more. So, when we were going out for these licensed tracks, we made sure that we got all the different stems, and we made sure that we got the right licenses so that we could play around with them in cool and interesting ways and make the music kind of pop in and out at certain points in the game. So that was a big part of kind of the process for us was making sure that the licensed music felt like bespoke score and kind of weaved in and out between the bits of bespoke score that we did.
Yeah, and it definitely shows. So were you delivered the stems of these tracks that you got the licenses for so that you could rearrange them in some way, or did you chop them up?
We did both. We kind of approached it vertically and horizontally. So, we really did need to insist on the stems in each case. And then after that, we did chop them up as well, so we could kind of rearrange them in real time based on player progression.
What we actually got from the kind of licenses and artists and stuff was very kind of different depending on what the track was and how old the track was. Some tracks we were playing around with were kind of very old tracks, and we might not necessarily have kind of like super broken down stems, and we had to kind of navigate our way around. Okay, what can we do with if we've only got this amount of stuff? How can we kind of work around those kind of restraints? And then, for a lot of the time we were kind of keen on getting as much broken down stems as we possibly could. And certainly with the newer tracks, we were able to kind of get a real granularity with stuff where we could play around and really extend them into some of the longer levels.
Nice. And I'm just curious, how did you decide what tracks to get? Because did you have kind of the levels in place or the ideas of the levels in place already? And you're like, okay, we need this kind of track for this level, this kind of track for that level. How did that come about?
Each level would fall as part of one of like a larger worlds, and kind of from early on, we developed a series of kind of ideas and kind of loose genres that would fit those worlds. So we kind of always had a rough starting point, really, for where we'd be looking in terms of the licensed tracks.
It was quite a good way of doing things where very often we would get grey box of the levels. So we'd have something that we knew we could very, very start looking at playlists, start looking at suggestions. From there, we'd be able to see if a particular level had a tempo, if someone was going through the level at a particular speed, or if it had a particular motif that suited a type of music. And then from there, what we would do is build out playlists. Jay, Joe, and myself would sit in a room, load up whatever version of the level was kind of ready to go at that point, play through and just keep putting different tracks on the background. That way we could see what worked in terms of flow, we could see what worked in terms of style, and as long as it fit within that loose theme that Jay mentioned, it was a contender. And then from there, it came down to, as Joe had mentioned, what kind of stems can we get? What kind of is it feasible as a track to in terms of licensing? Is it feasible in terms of other challenges as well? And given the way that game development works, you might often find that a level would change, and so you might need to go back to the drawing board. But that was kind of the process. It was a fun and
arduous,
at times arduous process. Yes.
Yeah, the playlists we had were pretty massive because of those kind of every time you found a really cool track, like, oh, this track's going to be amazing for this, and then you'd kind of listen to it in the context of how is this actually going to work in the game, and you'd find that actually the amount of material that we're going to be able to get from that track might be quite limited, because it's got this amazing chorus, but that's kind of all it's got to it. And if we're just going to be looping around on that for 3 hours, you're going to struggle to kind of develop and get interesting stuff. So we really had to find tracks that would kind of change a bit, and then that would be able to, in the edit, kind of really extend out and do new and interesting stuff without kind of moving too far away from the original kind of focus of the track.
Did you have a music system idea in place first, or did you kind of get the tracks and see how it would apply to the level and do a different thing per level? I really love to hear more about the technical implementation of the music.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of organically changed over time. There was definitely a plan at the beginning. It's not what we ended up with. We kind of adapted it, as I say, because of kind of some of the different ways that we got the license stuff through. It kind of opened up different doors on what we could do with it and what we couldn't do with it. But yeah, I mean, what we really wanted to achieve was that sense of movement through the levels, and taking licensed tracks and the composed tracks and making it feel like as you move through the levels, the music's moving with you, and creating that sense of kind of onward motion, which one helps propel the player kind of through the level, because it's kind of like the excitement, the journey, and you find that as the music moves with you, the player moves with the music, and it's kind of this synergy thing that kind of the whole level kind of starts moving in sync with itself, which is really nice. The other part of it was kind of, the more vertical layering of stuff. So bringing in different stuff as you were doing different stuff. So doing things like, early on, something that we thought was really cool and worked really nicely. Sackboy stops moving, it all kind of chills out a bit. So, you've not got this annoying loop going around. It kind of all just goes to something a little bit more ambient, which is really nice. So that became kind of a staple of if we're going to get whatever we're getting, we need to be able to isolate the drums or percussion and drop that out, so that when Sackboy stops, it all becomes a little bit more relaxed. Nice. We did a few bits and pieces with combat, so a few extra layers when you go into combat, although that's not kind of a big system in the game. It's just kind of a slightly additive thing where there's a few more layers if you run into combat. We did have kind of a couple of systems for general kind of music, as I was saying, like the beat dropping out and the music goes diegetic when you go in the bonus rooms, and there's a couple of bits like that. But ultimately it came down to kind of per level, because each level we wanted to kind of create a unique experience as you kind of move through them. So there's all these kind of cool little bits and pieces that aren't necessarily whole systems, but they were kind of bespoke for each of the level. And, because each level had its own really cool track, and we wanted to make that track and that level shine as one piece. I would say there was less systems, more just kind of lots of bespoke cool things that we did. And we did a lot of things with progression towards an objective. So as you're getting closer to the finish line, bringing in extra little bits just to build to those moments. So some ones that come to mind is like with the Cold Feet level towards the end, you get some vocals that come in when you're going. There's some big golden gates, and the vocal comes in. Open those pearly gold. What's the lyric, James? I forget.
Watch these golden gates open up for me. It's a very apt lyric just for that. And that was something of a. It was something of a serendipitous. There were lots of serendipitous moments, I feel, in the implementation. Another one being Private Psychedelic Reel. We always knew it was a cool track and that it suited something like an on rails level because it had this driving beat going underneath it. But it just so I think I'm right in saying that a particular bit in the level where the train you're on crests over a hill of the rail and then swoops down and in, that just happened. That wasn't, we asked level design to put that in. That just came in and worked really, really well for the synchronicity.
It'd be remiss of me at this point to not give a shout out to Glenn and Sam, Glenn Brown and Sam Dudley, who are a couple of the music editors on this as well, helping us get all this stuff in and making it sound very cool throughout the whole game.
The way that we were working pre-COVID, it would be you'd get a level, Sam, Glenn, Joe would start implementing the track. And then when you see the track within the level, you'd notice bits where something might happen. So, for example, an early level which features the absolutely brilliant band, check them out if you haven't heard them, Psychedelic Porn Crumpets.
What a name.
Their track, what a name, I know, what a name. Their track, Bill's Mandolin, it works so well within this level. And we noticed there was one bit where you get fired from a flower cannon into a bell. And it just so happened that the instrumental version of the track had a half-second gap during a guitar riff, kind of 2/3 of the way through the song, and it was exactly the kind of thing where you'd go to Sam or Glenn, can we line that up? Can we make that bell fit within the gap? And then, bless them, they actually would work and synchronize the track so that it did that. So it was little details which came about from not only the level informing the song, but the song informing the level as well.
Nice. And how about the sound design for the game? How did you kind of interact with that from a music perspective? Did you tie them together in some way? Because I know as a platformer, it has quite melodic sound design here and there as well.
We did quite a lot in terms of harmonizing stuff. Not so much like synchronized, but yeah, practically all the kind of the UI elements and anything that you would collect, anything that's kind of important in terms of messaging to the player. We built a system that enabled sound designers to tune all those. So anything with a melodic element, going back to your kind of traditional Mario coins, like your kind of fifth interval. Anything like that, they would be in tune. We'd kind of, it was a fairly simple system, really. The game was basically tracking the key of each of the track, whatever track was playing, it would kind of automatically adapt to bring those in tune.
Also track the tempo, right? So we could do cool stuff like you get the ×2 bubble, which is like a ticking clock, but that ticking clock is in sync with the music, and it's like doubles in time as well. Like when it starts running out of time, and I love that little detail in it, and it's just feels an extra thing that just makes the whole thing feel like it's a cohesive experience of sound and music and gameplay.
Yeah, it doubles up again, and then I think it goes to triplets right towards the end. It's kind of like a 90s dance snare fill, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and it really does come together. Like you say, it really is a cohesive experience, because that timer I noticed, I think the second time that I set it off, I was like, hang on, that's working with the music. That's cool. And it's all those little elements that add up. And I think because it's a platformer as well, right? You guys get to have fun as well as the player.
Yeah, that was one of the best things about working on the project. I mean, just on a full development scale as well, not just in audio. You know, the entire team really was just having a load of fun, really, and playing around. There was kind of no limits to, you know, to what people were kind of allowed to play around with, really, and it kind of made it a really, really interesting project to work on.
And it was a thing from the licensing side and from the kind of music team as a whole. The concept of surprise was something that we thought was really important. We wanted it that every time you went to a new level, you weren't able to predict what you were going to get. So whether that is a cool bit of implementation, whether that's one of the covers that we had created where it's a classic song done in its own style for the world, or whether it's one of the quote unquote music levels where the entire level is in sync to a particular track. Everything had to be, even if it was just an unconventional choice of song, it had to be something the player would be kind of taken aback with and unable to anticipate coming down the pipe.
Very cool. And in terms of the implementation tech, did you have any third-party software in terms of middleware, or was it all kind of owned, bespoke Sony stuff?
Yeah, so we use Wise. Yeah, a lot of like the stuff like the tempo stuff, so that was all kind of triggered through the MIDI system in Wise.
Nice. And was there any kind of extra capabilities from being able to work on the PS5 for this title that you were really excited to explore?
Well, obviously, 3D audio was, being a launch title. We were kind of tasked with looking at what we could do there, and Joe and the team down at CSG kind of put together a really, really exciting system that would just kind of, obviously render everything out in 3D. Anything that was, emitting in the level. And then on top of that, we had the haptics as well, which I don't know whether you know this or not, but this, comes down to the audio department for the most part. So that we took that on over at SUMO. We kind of had a lot of fun, just really finding out about this new tech and what it could do, and how far we could take it really with the gameplay interaction.
Nice. And was the extra memory budget and everything really useful in terms of the music that you used?
What do you think, Joe?
Well, I mean, the game itself is kind of quite split up into its kind of isolated levels. So everything, and Sumo team are super tech-focused team, and they're used to making games which kind of squeeze the best out of the budgets that you've got. So there was never any issues of running into any problems. And obviously this game is cross-platform as well, right? So we've got the PS4 version and the PS5 version.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So everything that we did needed to work on both. So the extra budget was just kind of a buffer for us in a way that allowed us to kind of, our focus was kind of making sure that it was going to work on the PS4, and then we could kind of do a little bit extra with the PS5. The bus structure itself changes a little bit for the PS5 to allow the 3D audio stuff to work, which is, in the context of the game is relatively subtle for Sackboy because it's kind of a locked camera, third person game. But it definitely does give an extra sense of depth and kind of a wideness to the soundscape, which is really cool.
Nice. I'm quite curious, actually. I know that from some sound design elements, you utilize the controller speaker as well. Did you do that much with the music in any way?
In terms of channeling any of the music through the controller, we didn't do that. Again, going back to the sound design, quite a lot of the key sound design elements were also, had certain elements coming out of the speaker. We didn't really just want to route, the same gameplay sounds through there. So we always approached these that we would have certain layers that were sent to the speaker that would complement the on-screen stuff rather than just, mimicking it. There was a big kind of drive at Sumo to make the haptics kind of a much larger experience. We didn't just want one element. We had to have kind of, all four. There was the gameplay interaction, there was the on-screen sound, there was the visual, and there was the haptic, and there was a controlled speaker. And they all had to work together on their own strengths, really. So, yeah, where we could. I mean, we didn't really want to overdo it. I mean, I'm personally not a huge fan of too much going through the controller speaker. But, when it was related to a player interacting with something in the world, then we wanted to message that through the controller as well.
Awesome. Now, I'm going to ask a bit more about the quote unquote boring side of things now, but I'm really curious how the workflow and pipeline went and how you all kind of collaborated and worked together, because there was quite a few of you on this project, both from sound design and music. What was the kind of process, specifically with the music, I guess, in terms of like, okay, you'd write some, you would send some, but you also had the licensed ones and they were editing it up. Who was kind of handling the kind of overseeing of this, or were you handling most of it?
Most of the sound design was done in-house at SUMO, but we also had a number of the CSG guys as well providing support. The music, it was pretty much the three of us. So I don't think anybody really had a tendency to kind of to own anything really. We generally agreed on things and worked in the world's largest spreadsheet for a good 2 years. That was home for a long time, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess once we had a good solid plan of how the worlds were going to be laid out. So, a big part of the initial process was finding those composers for each of those worlds. And once we'd nailed down the composers and some of the licensed tracks and kind of got a good idea of what that world was going to sound like, it was a case of going away and kind of finding the other levels. And then kind of it became a lot easier at that point, right, of sharing different ideas and sharing different playlists, because like this is the core, this is kind of what the world sounds like, and what other cool things can we attach to that. So I think that was kind of the trickiest part at the beginning. And once we kind of got a good idea of how to move forwards, that was then we kind of split that among ourselves and kind of went away and came back with our different playlists and like, what about if we try this? The big thing for us as well was, because this was going to be more kind of a story narrative driven game, we wanted to make sure that there was a key theme in it. And we wanted that to be across all of the worlds, and we wanted to implement that in a way that it felt like, the narrative was being driven and the theme was part of the overarching world. So Jay and I thought it would be a good idea to put together kind of a suite of melodies and bits and pieces that we could feed out to the different composers, and then they could use to integrate into their tracks, and it would make the whole thing feel like, even though it's these disparate styles and different kind of genres across the whole board, it would all kind of be brought together under the roof of kind of similar thematic content. We kind of handed out these kind of initially kind of these melodic ideas, which ended up becoming kind of a more solid, concrete theme to the composers, and they'd each integrate it into their tracks. And then we also took that theme and added it as layers onto some of the licensed tracks as well. So throughout the game, you'll hear this theme kind of coming back and back again. And when you pick up the memory orbs, which is like a key thing in the game, you'll get a little kind of musical stinger, which is Sackboy's theme. And that kind of throughout the whole game, you get that, and it keeps tying you back. So it keeps on feeling, even though you've got all these different styles and all these different artists and different composers, it's all under one kind of narrative roof, as it were. And I think that really helped the game feel like a cohesive experience.
Yeah, because it's that kind of anchor of continuity throughout, and also that positive reinforcement as you go along.
Exactly.
So you mentioned some composers, but how many overall were there on the project?
Go on, James.
We had, this is me counting it up. So we had depending on the definition of composer, we had at least 11, probably 12 composers on the project. Basically, Joe likes to call it a big musical jamboree, and I agree. It was like a big musical party where we went out to not only composers who have had previous with the franchise before as a nice little treat for the fans, but we went to people who never composed for games. We went to artists. We've got George King, who performs under the name Catching Flies. We've got Opio, who is a really cool glitch hop artist from Down Under. And we've got Tokyo Machine, who remixed the beloved Gardens theme for us in a really cool version. And then we also had Winifred and Brian, who'd worked on previous games. And even Lena Rain, who actually started out making custom music within the older Little Big Planet games. So for her, it was going from being a fan of the games to actually contributing music to Sackboy: A Big Adventure, which is a really nice arc to see. So corralling all of these composers under one giant umbrella was a challenge, but we had really great support from Jay and Joe with their Sackboy theme, from Nick Foster, who was the genius behind Vex's theme in the game, which, given that he's the antagonist, crops up throughout. And Nick also did the cutscene music for us. So he served as a bit of a musical thread throughout the game as well, where he contributed not only a theme, but the glue that stitches all these levels together.
Nice. And in terms of your role then, James, like it's kind of one of the more mysterious roles of game audio. What do you actually do as a music supervisor?
So the music supervisor is many hats. It was a great project to actually work on because of the way that Jay and Joe and myself worked. It was a little bit of a Pixar-like brain trust, but specifically around the music. So my role would be to offer suggestions for the music. So very often the collaborative playlist we'd work on, I would feed into those. Then you would find a track that maybe worked, or maybe a handful. Then my role is to go and license the track, find the assets that the guys need. It would also involve the sourcing and hiring the composers. Then there is some kind of secondary exploitation, I guess you could say, of the thing. So soundtracks, other uses of the music that we have created for the game, things like that, whereby we promote it and try and get it out there. And as I say, we managed to work with Sony Music to actually get the soundtrack released and out there. And the great thing is that it includes a whole load of stuff from the game. So that was really, really good to see.
Yeah, and it has a full soundtrack release, doesn't it? It's on Spotify and everything, I believe.
It is indeed.
How's that vinyl coming along, James?
It's, oh dear. It's coming along eventually.
Awesome. So you've had all of these composers and now you have DLC, is that right?
We have these newly released Knitted Knight challenges, which are part of the PlayStation tournaments. And I'll pass over to Jay and Joe, who composed a new track for it.
I'll let Jay speak to the new stuff.
I think just to elaborate on the DLC, it's I think it's a fairly new venture, isn't it, for PlayStation, with these new kind of online challenges, and they're basically competitive race levels, and you can win like in-game assets like costumes and decorative pieces and things like that. And we wanted, because they take part in the Knitted Knight trials, we wanted to give them a bit of a slightly different identity. So we collaborated on a new music track. We wanted to keep it in a similar place, so it's kind of driving EDM in a similar space to the Knitted Knight trials music. But obviously we were then able to incorporate elements again of the main theme to kind of bring that Sackboy motif throughout the levels.
And with the challenge element, did you get to explore any new ways of using the music for the DLC?
The way they are is that they happen so quickly. There wasn't a great deal of scope for really, we never really had the time to play around. And I'm not talking about the time work-wise. I mean the time within a single run-through of the level. These can be anything, definitely under a minute, but sometimes, a good player can be through it in 30 to 40 seconds. So the challenge was actually getting some kind of interesting arrangement actually to complete within that time.
You had your own challenge to race to the finish before you got to the end.
There are some insanely good players of this game who just zoom through these levels like they're so hard. And I was playing it the other day. I played it when it came out on Saturday or whenever it was, and I got through the level. I think it was maybe the first time I actually got through the level without dying. And I was like, smashed it. I'm surely in the top 5% of people. And it was like, you're in the bottom 5% of people. I was like, come on.
That's when you give up, right? You think, I nailed that one. And then you look at the leaderboard and you're like 1,000th or like 3,000.
Yeah, dreadful.
Now, we spoke a bit about the kind of technical implementation of the music. And I wondered if there's any more kind of like secret, mysterious things in the background that the player may not be aware of that you did with the music throughout Sackboy.
Yeah, there's lots of cool stuff. I kind of mentioned in passing earlier, like there's some nice bits where when you go into bonus rooms and things like that, the music moves from non-diegetic to diegetic. So it kind of moves from being just music that's kind of scoring your playthrough to actually being in the world. And it kind of, as you open the door to a bonus room, you can kind of hear the music feeding out the door. And that was a kind of a nice use of 3D audio as well, because the actual emitter is placed on the door. So you can hear the music actually coming from the door when you're playing it on PS5. That's a nice little touch. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the music levels, which we haven't really talked too much about yet as well, which where the whole world is pumping to the music, and that's where the designers kind of really went to town with taking a piece of music and making the whole thing, pump and move and kind of give a narrative journey through that piece of music. So like Uptown Funk, for example, you're kind of going through, and then as you go through one of the roll tunnels, it kind of does like a little narrative vignette of the characters popping up, which is suggestive of the lyrics in the song. And there's loads of nice little touches like that. I guess the biggest thing hidden wise is the covers, right? So like it's something that you play through, and a big thing for us with the covers that we did was not giving them away straight away, so that a player's playing the level and kind of halfway through the level, they're like, wait a second, is this kind of post-classical version of Material Girl by Madonna? Just like, oh, what? Yeah, it is. Or is this a Peruvian version of Just Can't Get Enough?
Nice.
There's some really kind of fun moments in the game where, hopefully, people are kind of surprised and delighted by the fact that this is a really cool, weird and unheard version of this song that I'm familiar with, that also kind of really suit the world. Like we did Fly Me to the Moon for one of the space levels, where you're going up and up and up, until at the end you see kind of the moon out of the top of the spaceship, and the content of that is so perfect for the level, but it was like a electronic Daft Punk-esque version of Fly Me to the Moon, which wasn't particularly obvious right from the beginning. And then as you get closer to the point where it's kind of the reveal at the end of the level, it's like, this is Fly Me to the Moon. And there's some really nice stuff like that.
And even just with that one, there's some very nice kind of musical touches to it. So as Joe mentioned, it uses Fly Me to the Moon, and it's a level where you keep going up an elevator, basically stopping at different floors, and with each different floor the tempo of the song increases, so that it gets more and more frantic as you go up the lift, until you get this, it slows right down and flourishes right at the end with the end of the track. And there's little touches like that for someone like me who appreciates music, which is just astounding. I'm amazed still every time I play through it. Another one being a level came in that was called Electro Swing. So it basically determined what the genre of the music was going to be.
Pretty much.
From the off. Yeah.
James, it was called Electro Swing.
Electro Swing. Okay, so there was a pun in the name.
Completely different.
But we had our genre, and it was a case of, there's so much electro swing out there. How can we make this something that isn't just sticking an electro swing song in here? And thankfully enough, Glenn, who works with us in a previous life, had composed a electro swing track. So we managed to get that. And because obviously Glenn works with us and we were able to discuss, we were able to get a whole new arrangement of the Sackboy theme to sit on top of this electro swing track, and it sounds brilliant. The recording session was great fun for that, having these top players blasting out the Sackboy theme in a big band arrangement. And it's something that players might not immediately cotton onto, that it is the Sackboy theme, but it is there. And so it's little details like that which we hope people will keep replaying these levels, and then eventually, it clicks that it's something that they hadn't noticed.
Yeah, that's awesome. I look forward to that. I'm actually quite a big fan of Electro Swing, so I'm looking forward to that level as well. But every level so far is already, I'm still early days in the game, but I was already finding so many things all the time that was connected or worked with each other or, was affected by one another. And it's incredible. And I was going to say that, it's quite nice to hear how music was involved in the development cycle. Because, having these music levels and everything, it must have been amazing. Because, from my experience in game audio so far, most of the time you kind of go, the composer's over there doing music while everyone else is kind of doing sound design and making the game. And then you kind of get some tracks in at some point and you're like, oh, that's cool. And then kind of carry on working. And then, it sounds like it was such an integral part of the development cycle this time, which must have felt so nice.
Yeah, I think it was. The sound designers over at SUMO are really into the music, so they have a keen interest in what we're doing. So they're all kind of, keeping tabs on what we've got in the playlists and even a lot of the designers as well. There are a number of designers that have been on the team for a number of years now that have a real vested interest in the music and often send over suggestions, and many a time these actually make it into the playlist, and sometimes even getting selected as well. So I don't know, it just helps having a team that have a passion for it, and yes, as I was mentioning before, it is a key part of this franchise's DNA, really. So it's not something we can really allow to just sit as an afterthought, that bring in a composer at the end. It's key to the development process, really.
Although they're called the music levels, we like to think of all the levels in the game as musical,
of course,
because it's something that, while they're the most ostentatious in terms of the music working in sync with the level design, as we mentioned earlier, every level has something in it where the track is directly synchronized with something in the level, or the situation that Sackboy finds him in, or the implementation is cool. And it's something that a lot of players will play the music levels, and it's something that actually we noticed, where lots of players will think that the game has 5 licensed tracks, and those are the music levels. Whereas in fact, as we said, the split is pretty, significant towards licensed, to the point where even the first level of the game, where we've seen people say, this is perfect, this is, made for the game. Nope, that's a licensed track that we just managed to find, and it really gave the sense of setting out on an adventure with Sackboy.
Awesome. And what would you say each of your kind of highlights or proudest moments from the game are?
I think in terms of proudest moments, I was really pleased with what we achieved with the musical sound design. I think it's something that, again, going back to what you were saying about things that people might not really notice, but I think it really does make a huge difference in enabling the sounds to sit so much better with the mix in general. I don't know if you were also inferring a favourite level, but I think for me there is a 2-player level in space. I forget the name of it. If you guys can help me out, is it Lead the Way? Using the mono surround track. I just think that track is so perfect for that level. And there is a moment where there's a bit of a nightclub area, so we kind of implement, for a brief moment, the music kind of turns diegetic. That was Joe's handiwork there, where it feels like you're in a nightclub just for about 20 seconds. And I don't know, I think that's my favourite moment in the game.
That's difficult. There's a lot, when you're working with so many different artists and so many different tracks, there's so many kind of fun moments and so much fun in the game anyway. Kind of the big point for me was the actual recording session. So like all the cutscene stuff, as well as quite a lot of the composed level stuff. We did a big recording session at Air with a string section, a small brass section, and a gospel choir. And those sessions are always kind of like, really nice culmination of all the hard work that you've done and getting to that point. And you can, I don't say you can relax at those sessions, because they're kind of non-stop. There's a lot of money involved, and it's quite, they can be quite stressful, but the culmination of all the work coming together and hearing it being played out live, which I was fortunate enough to be there, but it was COVID times. Unfortunately, not everyone could be there, and we had to do a lot of it remote. So that was, a real special kind of moment for me in the project. But in terms of level, I think the grand finale is a great one. I don't want to give any spoilers for you, Sam. If you're
please don't. Save that one for me.
But it brings together a lot of the musical ideas throughout the whole game into kind of one epic track that kind of really scores the level nicely. And it kind of, again, it's a showcase of lots of different bits, almost a nostalgic level as well. Nostalgia of the game that you've just played. It's like, remember that bit of the game? That was so cool. And it brings a lot of those ideas together. So yeah, that's that for me.
Awesome. And James, you've bought yourself enough time now by making them two go first. So you can't hide anymore.
So it's, I don't want to sound diplomatic, but genuinely every level is special. However, I will say one of the things that a music supervisor always wants to do, and as much as the music levels are fantastic, and it's so good to see these classic songs reimagined in a new way and being able to experience them in something fresh. There is a special place in the heart of every music supervisor when you can get tracks in the game that barely anyone has heard, or, it's such a left field choice. Like, how did you find that? And I won't say the artist, but one of the tracks in the game, after we licensed it, the artist genuinely was just asked, how did you find this? And it was so nice to see that this track that had, it was a little older, it was still doing, people were listening to it, but it hadn't got the attention that maybe it deserved. And being able to bring that to a new audience and seeing, a direct result of it being in the game and in our official license playlist, seeing that track get some extra attention, it's a really, really great feeling, and it really helps that it's a banging track. But that's probably it. It's finding those slightly left field, unexpected choices, and we've got loads of those. We've got bands like De Start. Jay mentioned Mono Surround, the aforementioned Pepper Night track. These are all things that aren't on the same level as Uptown Funk or Britney Spears, but for someone out there, they will be special. And I think it was when I was looking through online, someone had created just randomly a birthday playlist for their twins' birthday, and they'd included a load of stuff from Sackboy. And it just showed me that that's it. For these kids, this game is going to bring them a load of new favorites. And that's the most special thing that you can do, I think. And that is what will be the legacy of this game for me.
That's awesome. That's a fantastic note to end it on. I'd like to thank James, Jay, and Joe again for joining me today to talk about the music of Sackboy: A Big Adventure. It is on PS4 and PS5, and the soundtrack is available on Spotify as well as many other places. Thanks again for your time, and thanks again everyone for listening. See you guys later.
Cheers. Thanks, Sam.
Cheers, Sam.
Hey everyone, this is Sam. Thanks very much for listening to the Sound Architect podcast today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, there are many ways you can support the show, which is incredibly appreciated. Obviously, there's the financial way where you can support us on Patreon, which is patreon.com/sounddesignuk. However, there are many other ways which also help, such as liking, subscribing, reviewing, commenting, and sharing via whatever channel you listen on. Thanks so much for your support already. It really is a work of passion for me, and I'd love to keep sharing the knowledge from all these talented and wonderful people. Thanks again, and catch you on the next episode.